In the previous video, we already discussed the historical reason why Japanese tend to have the eager mind, okay? Or they are pretty good technological innovators. And we especially compared, the experiences between China and Japan after 1860s. Okay, and we said that Japan, since Taika reform in the year 645, in the between that and the Major Restoration in 1860s, for more than 1200 years, Japan had been had established itself as a pretty good student, okay? A very good, very effective learner. Okay? And when they learned from China, they did a pretty good job. Okay? Actually, even today, many Chinese people believe that, when they visit Japan, they find that the Chinese culture is actually better preserved in Japan. Okay? At least in some places. And so what happened was, during the Major Restoration, when Japanese opened their eyes and looked around and realized that China was no longer the best teacher available there, and they find that the Westerners, Americans, British, and Dutch, these are the better teachers, and they know more about the technological innovation. Especially about the more powerful weapons. Okay, because remember, as we said, the original goal of Major Restoration is to build a stronger army. Okay, to encounter the challenges from the Westerners. So they find that the Westerners know how to build guns, warships, and other weapons. Okay, and at least better than Chinese people. So that's why when they decide to learn from the Westerners, there's no kind of psychological difficulty for them to make that switch. However, if you look at China, because it's been the world's largest economies for many centuries, okay, and so it has that kind of the national pride, and they look down to other countries, okay, and including the Westerners. So they were reluctant to give up their own culture and adapt the new technologies and learn the new ideas. Okay. So we use the example, or the comparison between the Empress Cixi, which is a supreme ruler of China, from 1860s all the way to early 20th century, okay, early 1900. And we also look at the one of the founders of the modern Japan, Fukuzawa Yukichi. Okay, and we said that one of the most quotations from him is "Goodbye, Asia," and "Hello, Europe." Okay, and he strongly advocated that Japan should, give up learning from China, but turn around and learn everything from the Westerners. Okay, and he actually earned pretty wide respect in Japanese society. Okay, that's why they put his poetry on the 10,000 Japanese yens. Okay, the banknote. All right. Now here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at a different or take a different way to understand why Japan has eager mind. Okay, compared to many other economies. All right, and this time what we're going to look at is a geographical reason. Okay, now here what I'm showing you is the world income map. Okay, based upon the GDP, nominal GDP per capita in 2007. Now, I know this map is, or the data used to make this map is a little bit outdated, but because this is the only one I can find online with different colors. Okay, so if you Wikipedia, the income by countries or income or GDP per capita by countries, you can find a more updated one. I think probably using 2018 data. But those ones are always used the same color but different darkless. Okay? So it's hard for me, when I talk about that and refer to a specific one, right? It's hard to say, this is a very dark brown or light dark brown. It might not be easy for you guys to follow. Okay, so that's why I use this one. The good news is the income per person, it's been determined for in the past several hundred years. So there are some changes over time, but these changes are relatively small. In other words, the income level is kind of persistent. Okay, so for example, here we find these countries with a dark blue or purple. Okay, here like Canada, United States, and most of the Western European countries, and Australia, New Zealand, Japan. These are, they have their GDP per capita higher than $30,000 per year. Okay, oops. And if you look at the most recent one, you probably see this number like $50,000 above or $60,000 above. That's partially because of the increase in real income and partially because of the inflation over time. Okay, so again, in terms of the category, like for example, Japan, on this map has been classified as one of the high income rich countries, and if you look at the recent one, it's also the rich countries. Okay, or India, for example, is relatively poor, like middle income countries, right, or developing countries. Again, in the most recent map, it's also the middle income developing countries. Okay. All right, and if you took 295 with me, intermediate macro, you probably know that we spend a lot of time talking about this map, right? It's a very interesting thing here to look at, especially the regularities or the geographic patterns of these countries. Okay, how they distributed, right? And how we use different angles, different ways to explain why some countries are rich but others are poor. Okay, now here we want to narrowly focus upon Japan. Okay, but we would start with a comparison between Japan and Great Britain. Okay, now I would strongly encourage you to pause the video and think about the geographical similarities between these two countries. Okay, again, the geographical similarities between Great Britain and Japan. In other words, in what aspects they are close to each other, they're similar to each other geographically. Okay, now you can pause the video and think about it. All right, now let's come back and talk about this. I guess many of you probably already noticed that both are island economies. Okay, geographically, both are island economies. In other words, both are surrounded by water. Okay, now here I would ask you to pause the video again and think about, is that good news or bad news for their economic development? Once again, being surrounded by water is good or bad for economies' development in the long run? All right, pause the video, think about it. All right, now here we would say that in general, okay, we find that these two economies are today rich, developed ones, right? So we would probably tend to draw the conclusion that being an island economy or surrounded by water is actually the good news for these economies, right? For their economic development in the long term. Now, let's think about why, okay? Now, there might be many different reasons. One reason is, if they're surrounded by water, then they are less likely to be invaded by neighboring countries. Okay, in other words, Japan, for example, if you look at the Japanese history, okay, when Mongolia, conquered most part of Asia and Europe, they also attempted to conquer Japan, but they failed. Okay, because of the ocean, because they have a pretty strong army on land, but not in the sea. Okay, and the same thing happened to Great Britain during the World War II. Right, Germany conquered many European countries. Okay, and but not including UK. Okay, or Great Britain because of the English Channel. Okay, stopped Germany. So that might be one reason. But another reason I want you guys to think about is trade, okay, or their engagement in trade, because both economies you can find today, or even the past century, during the 20th century, were heavily engaged in global trade, right? Now, why this is important, okay, the global trade engagement, because we're gonna say that if you trading with the outside, okay, with the rest of the world, it's actually a very important learning process. Okay, so when you import goods and services from other countries, you would know what they are buying, why these goods and services imported are better than domestically made ones, okay, and in which aspects they are better, and how these foreign producers are making these things, right? So it's full of the information would come into the country with the imported goods, okay. And when we think about the outflow of the goods, in other words, the exports, it's the same thing. So, a Japanese firm wants to export to the United States, to Australia, they have to understand the American and Australian consumers' preference in the first place, right? What we want in the United States or in Australia, so that they can get their products sold on American or Australian markets, right? So again, exports and imports, full of the information involved. Okay, so it's really not just open the doors to the rest of the world just for trade. Okay, like goods and services. Most of the time, the general public understanding of the trade is about money. Okay, we make more money or we lose money, right? If we're running a trade deficit, we're losing money to other countries. When we, running a trade surplus, we're making money, from other countries. That is true to some extent, but what's more important is, again, when you have a pretty heavy engagement or active engagement in global trade, you tend to have an eager mind or curious mind, okay, and then become a good innovator, okay. Now, here we would also like to, discuss why this geographic location, being an island economy or surrounded by water, gives Great Britain and Japan better position to be engaged in global trade. So that's what we're gonna discuss in the next video. Okay, we would also discuss some empirical evidence. Okay, beyond this comparison between Great Britain and Japan. Okay, because you might think, well, I'm just cherry picking or handpicked these two economies to get the point across. It may or may not be true among other economies. Okay, so we're gonna look at more economies in a wider range. All right.